Welcome to another critical conversation. Let's join in with Marshall, Brian, and Kate as the Owl Pellet crew takes on the question, what if agricultural education didn't exist? Thanks for joining.
Welcome back to Critical Conversations. We've had a great time discussing some new critical conversations, and this next one, have you guys seen the show that's like, what if the world ended? What would happen to New York, or what would happen to London? And it like describes that the buildings would slowly corrode. Today we're going to play that game with ag education. What would happen if today ag education ceased to exist?
What would slowly corrode?
Bum, bum, bum. So what would happen? What is it about ag education that is so important that if it went away, we would see impacts? Or would there be impacts? It's interesting to argue with the idea of, do we know that we have got to be in place? So let's have that conversation.
I think it's a great place to start is for every single one of us as ag teachers to sit here and say, if ag ed went away tomorrow, would anybody notice?
Yeah.
Do the people in your school and in your community see any sort of value in what you do? And if the answer is no, or you got to pause about it a little bit, that may tell us that we're not doing the right things. We may be doing good things, but we may not be doing all of the right things.
Yeah, you focus so much on, I know we've talked before and research has been done on what do ag teachers do, right? So, but you focus on it so much from that angle, right? What's our elevator speech? That it might actually help to come at it from that other angle. If you didn't exist, what would be gone? So I'm not sure. Dr. Ed Osborne and I at the University of Florida did a study a couple of years. Well, oh my gosh, it was like 8 years ago.
27 years ago.
It was a lot longer ago than it was like last year.
No.
And it was like 8 years ago. And we went around and had focus groups with ag teachers, and it was focused originally on what they needed, what they wanted, and how we could help them. And they kept coming back to like, well, administrators don't know what we do, and so we don't get their support. We need their support. And the community doesn't understand what we do. So I started asking them, okay, well, what do you do? And they couldn't answer. They would stop for a second, and then they'd give me an example, right? So they'd say like, well, let me tell you about this kid that I have that's working with this steer, right? They'd always give an example, but they could not generalize that specific example to something that they do to kind of what you said. What need are they filling?
Right.
They could not answer that, and I wonder if that is that nationwide. Can teachers? Do we know what ag teachers do? What they contribute?
Well, I think, when we look at that real big picture question, I think that we could all start to argue that. I start thinking, kind of backtrack. Like instead of trying to start big and say, what do we do? Then let's backtrack and start to think about what would happen if it went dark. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, I'm going to make my run at it. Here we go. The first thing that would happen is schools would have to find additional ways to engage the large population of students that are engaged in a lot of rural, urban, a lot of our programs. Mm-hmm. So immediately principals are going to have to find other options for elective type classes to engage students.
Where do you think they'd go? Where would ag students go if ag didn't exist?
Some of them would have to totally re-identify because that is their culture.
Yeah.
And I think for a large slice of the American population, we are their fit.
Yes.
So I think maybe they would move toward some of the other vocational groups, or maybe they would move, I think they would diffuse into these other maybe not as good fits.
So they would just be a stretch. They would fit in other places but be a stretch there.
Yeah, like my culture, like my life, my culture, my people, right. Like I was going to wear a blue jacket, and if that were gone, I would lose a piece of my family's heritage a little, and the blue jackets. And I think that's that first thing is schools would have a decrease in engagement for the population that we serve. Mm-hmm. And I think the first thing people would notice missing, I think they would start to miss blue jackets. They would start to miss the Blue Jackets at county fairs and at competitions, and they would miss the Blue Jackets flooding their big town for state convention. They would start to notice that, where is my FFA sausage? I buy sausage from them every year.
Yeah, fruit.
Where's the really neat banquet that we go to? It's just so neat to see those kids perform. But then I think the longer term problem is, as agriculture is becoming less prominent, I think that it would start to go dark a little bit, this culture and this reviving of the culture of agriculture. So I think a lot of them honestly would become very engaged in 4-H. So you could make the argument it wouldn't be that big of a deal, they would just engage in 4-H.
So I'm not sure though. I'm thinking about it more from the learning standpoint, the education, because what makes me a little bit nervous about the things you were talking about is nowhere in there was what we actually teach students.
Well, but I'm not saying what I think, I'm not going there. I'm going from the outside looking in, what would the buzz be?
If I was a community member?
I don't think the buzz would be like,
okay,
oh no, the sky is falling. We're not teaching the principles of soil science.
Okay.
I think rather they'd be like, where's those kids that bring sausage to me?
Yeah, I kind of think a little, so the way I was kind of thinking about it was, what if it didn't exist, as in it didn't go dark today, but what if it literally never was, right? And so then, like, if it wasn't a thing, we see often this debate. I see it a lot on social media, probably because I'm on social media more than I should be. But we see this debate, like
all for owl pellet stuff,
food,
though, right?
100% owl pellets. If my boss is listening, it's 100% work stuff.
Yeah.
So, we see the food babes and the Dr. Oz's and all of that come up, and then the counter argument is always from those that have some kind of tie to ag ed, right? So what if, I think that's where we'd miss it. The education that comes from being empowered to make those arguments would just be gone.
Right.
Okay, but like realistically, sometimes I think when you're at the center of your world looks big. But when we really truthfully look at it, let's make the argument that ag education is not that impactful. It's really, like, we serve a little over half a million people in the world, and there's a lot of other students.
Yeah.
We just provide one of many options for students to engage. There's a million others to engage in. Maybe we're not as big as we think we are.
Right. Well, I think that's part of the deal. They're always, the joke says that whenever the high school teacher's out, they have to hire a substitute in to keep things going, but whenever the principal is gone, they don't have to hire a substitute. So who's actually doing the work, right?
Yeah.
But the same thing.
Oh yeah, that was good. I didn't even notice it. That was a really good burn. Nice job.
I always thought when I left the building it fell apart.
That's right. Same thing with the barber chair. Same way. But I think you make a very good point. That's one of the things I wanted to mention about. We think we're huge. We think we're critical. But in the grand educational scheme, we are like a micro percentage of the students even have access to an ag ed program, let alone are involved in an ag ed program. And if we went away, the question is, would anybody notice? Because it is so small, so we have to make sure people understand the impact that we're making. And I get the idea about, they're going to miss the Blue Jackets, and then we're going to the impacts from there. But on the learning side of things, and this may just be personal experience, it's the enrollment, it's graduation, it's staying involved in school. Because I know that sometimes there were kids that came to school just because they had the ag class. Mm-hmm. And they were not going to be your honor roll students. They weren't troublemakers, but they were just kind of there. They wouldn't have come to school or would have stayed in school if it wasn't for ag. Ag is what kind of got them through the day to do that sort of a thing. And I think that may be one of the buttons that we need to be promoted about what we do in school-based ag ed that we don't do a lot on.
So I had not actually thought about this until now, but you guys are talking about me. I wasn't in an ag program. Ag didn't exist for me, and all of my friends, everything I did, all happened at the barn. And I did not know, I went to a school of 3,000 people. I did not know a single other person that rode horses. And I went to the barn that was half a mile down the road from my high school. Nobody knew it existed, and that is where my entire, I lived for 3 o'clock. Mm-hmm. When I left and spent the rest of the day at the barn, I did not have, as far as I was the one with no friends, right? Because because my people weren't there. My people were not at school. That's what happens if ag ed is not there.
I think of ag education, I see two major products. We always talk about the whole development of the kid. There's just something magical that happens in ag education, and I'm all in that. Like my career is ag education. I believe in it. It fundamentally changed my life. But as a principal, I also know that if ag education didn't exist, as a principal, it was my job to keep students engaged. And there were lots of times where I've had programs that got closed.
Right.
And we found ways to re-engage students. So I'm going to go here for a minute. Everyone get your tomatoes ready. So ag education gets unfunded, ceases to exist. I think that as a principal, I was forced to see ag education, the band, the theater, the newspaper. I had a myriad of engaging activities. So if ag education went away, I would find ways to re-plug in those students in other engaged activities. Perhaps 4-H, maybe I would try to bring 4-H in and have after school 4-H clubs. But I think from an educational standpoint, I think we would find ways to mitigate the damages in growing and developing children in education, right? My bigger question is, would there be long-term impacts? And I think this is where sometimes we get off mission. Would there be long-term impacts to the profession of agriculture, to feeding the world? If ag education didn't exist, would it drastically impact the industry of agriculture?
Right. And I think if we can't sit here and say, yes, it would, and mean it and have some facts to back that up, I think that tells us that we're off mission. I think we're probably there. Mm-hmm. I think we've been distracted by a lot of things over time, and I'm not saying that we've got to get back to basics and only be teaching cows, sows, and plows again, but are we staying up with what's happening in the agriculture industry? And we keep going back to that report in 88 saying agriculture education needs to be about in agriculture and about agriculture. We've got to make sure that we're doing that and really being purposeful and focused on the education aspect rather than just the fun and games pieces of it. Using those other kind of activities as engagement and to enhance it, but are we really connected to the industry we're supposed to be preparing folks for? I still argue, we talked about it in the professional one, I would still argue that ag teachers, when you check a box on what industry are you in, we got to check the education box because that's where we work. We are directly connected to the agricultural industry and making sure that connection's happening.
And that goes back to what we were talking about before with your classes, right? The actual content that you teach. So that's where I'm thinking, like when I was an ag teacher, right? I'm passionate about my students being career ready. I want to make sure that they have a place in the ag industry, and I would love to say yes to your question. Do my classes make a difference as far as people being prepared? I would love to say yes, and the content I taught would lead me to have to say no. Mm-hmm. I don't know where students would have to know 38 breeds of rabbits.
Yeah. So here's my argument then. I don't necessarily, so if I believe, which we talked about with career pathways, I believe that the goal of secondary-based ag ed is to take really high potential kiddos, funnel them into agriculture, build that interest and exposure, and start to connect them to the next steps to move them into careers. I would argue if ag education ceased to exist, our colleges of agriculture nationally would see a severe decline in enrollment in the College of Ag. Because you think about what ag education does, it pulls all these students to state conventions, and it pulls students to our land-grant institutions and our college-focused, agriculturally focused institutions.
Yeah.
They're exposed to them, they get to be a part of the culture, and you're in ag education or you're in FFA, and then you're drawn to this College of Ag, and you go to National Convention, and it's all the land-grant universities drawing you into their institution. I really do think it makes me wonder, is our primary role recruiting kids, exposing them, getting them hooked into agriculture, and then connecting them to the next steps to fill the pipeline for careers in ag?
See, though, I don't know if that's true. The kids that you were talking about, their identity is so rooted in ag. I think if ag ed didn't exist, they would find it anyway. I mean, I did. I had nothing to do in school with ag, and it actually was a benefit to me because I didn't realize that there was this, we talk about those kids right at the kind of lower end where ag is their place, and if it wasn't for them, if it wasn't for ag, they wouldn't be in school, and I get that. But I didn't know that was a thing. So I didn't have that. Sometimes we see this the stereotype, right, or this misnomer that ag isn't for smart kids. So, and I saw none of that. So I had no problem saying, yeah, I'm summa cum laude, and I'm gonna enroll in ag.
See, but I'm opposite. I'm from an 8,000 acre farm and ranch. It's my family's entire income was from that ranch. I worked on it every day since I was born.
Yeah.
And I was the valedictorian of the high school, and I was summa cum laude, and so it was very clear that I was going to go and be a doctor. And so the difference is,
why though? Why were you going to be a doctor and not go into ag if it was?
I was a servant of my dad's farm since I was born. I had one whole career in ag. I had 15 years of being a career in ag. I was going to do what I wanted to do. But I think the fact that ag education exposed me to all the careers that were out there. When I got through all my high school messiness, I was connected. All my people were ag. Mm-hmm. And so the people I knew, the people I was connected with, they were all ag. And so that ultimately funneled me back into that. I mean, I originally started at a small private school to be a doctor. But I was still, all those things were ringing in my ear, that ag education. I tried to fight it, but all the things that I loved that were propagated in ag education eventually pulled me back to a land-grant institution where I'm now devoted to ag ed.
I think that's, it's that opportunity that they see. I think back 1,000 years ago, you talk about FFA convention. I hadn't thought about this for a long time. When I was wearing a blue jacket, they even had those back then, and talked to a guy at a booth that talked about CPAs and agriculture and what they did, and the whole idea of ag business was even a thing and how that worked. And I didn't end up going into ag business, but I'm like, that's pretty cool. You can talk about this sort of thing. And so it shows you the other opportunities that were out there.
Even if you were raised on a farm and you knew one opportunity really well.
Right. And so it's connecting those kind of things out there. And I think that's an important piece of what we do is broadening those horizons to show what the diversity of agriculture is. Because everybody thinks they may know ag. Even when you get your people in ag, you know your little slice of ag.
Yeah.
They don't see the breadth of it or even what modern ag is today.
But, and I even think about, if I could improve some elements, I was heavily involved in the agri-science fair. I loved it. I had 90 buckets of sand, and I was amending them, and I was raising chili peppers and cutting them off, and the biomass and measuring that, and I was working with a field scientist, and it was amazing. I loved it. And now that I'm a professor, I look at the plant science folks, and I'm like, well, they do cool stuff. But nobody ever said, hey, you're involved in the agri-science fair. Man, you're really good at that. And I loved it. No one ever showed me, do you know that a professor that there's professors that's what they do daily, is work in these really technological labs growing plants?
Right.
No one connected that for me. So
they didn't think he was professor material.
yeah, they're like, bless his heart. Maybe you should be in the quiz bowl. On the second team quiz bowl.
That's right.
So it makes me think we could do better.
Right.
But I do think we are filling the pipeline of ag workers.
Right.
But we know people don't like plants. We know there's gaps in that pipeline. So I wonder if we could be a part of that. And
I think, right, as we're thinking about the teachers that are listening, like, there's a danger in saying that, I think, because then we can sit back and say, oh, well, okay, like I originally, when they started this conversation, I was like, oh gosh, would I make a difference? But Marshall said that I'm filling a pipeline, so I'm good. Right? So, like, how... But
I don't think we can just say the whole world will crumble.
No.
Like, I think that we have adequate evidence to say we play a vital role in supporting agriculture as an industry. And I don't think we can, my opinion is we have areas to improve, but I think we have evidence that we are a pipeline for colleges of agriculture, which are ultimately the providers of workforce in agriculture.
Yeah, I just don't know if that pipeline would go to a trickle if we weren't around. I think that...
You think college enrollments in the colleges of ag would stay the same?
Maybe not entirely, but I don't think they would shift as much as you think.
So Brian, do you think they would decrease or stay the same?
I think they would decrease. I don't think it would completely dry up. I think it would decrease over time. I think that's part of the thing, is part of our job is to be better at that. And so I think, to me, the answer end up in the middle. A lot of these kind of things. It's not one way or the other. It's like, how do we keep doing the good things we're doing, but do better at it, making sure that people do see. Because you're right. Right now, you talk to programs, when you're going to open up a program, in Florida, Orange County Schools, which is Orlando area, has told us they're going to put an agri-science program in every single middle school and high school in that county.
Which is how many?
So they're going to be hiring 80 ag teachers over the next 2 years. They already have probably about 25 ag teachers, right?
Wow. In a county.
In that county.
I was one of 3.
And so they're wanting to grow to do that. But whenever they're talking about that, what are they thinking about doing? They want to have animals, which is great. And I'm all for animal science and those sort of things too. But why do you want that? Well, everybody wants to come see the bunny rabbit or
animals
the
and
thing.
Animal science are 2 totally different things.
To do that, but in that particular area with us, there is major biotechnology happening with plant science. There's the horticulture side of things. But yet, how do we help connect our students to those kind of things to show the career opportunities that they can have in that, not just come play with a fluffy bunny?
Yeah.
And again, rabbit people don't call me.
So, but Brian hates fluffy bunnies. If we had marshmallows right now, we could play fluffy bunny.
But so how do we do a better job of that? I think we're doing a good job, and also we have to do a better job of telling our story. Going back to your example, Kate, we have to be able to say, this is the difference I am making in my program. Yeah. This is the difference we collectively make. Mm-hmm. And I think that may be one of the things that we have to see this in our own programs, in our own schools, but also maintain and being collected through the state, through the county, whatever else our structure might be, to see how we're really moving things forward collectively for agriculture, because we don't operate in the island of the school anymore.
Right. Well, once again, the 2 young buck professors going at the polar opposite end. And then, ready for this? The wise old owl comes back in the middle. Yeah. Well, I think a key to this is that we cannot rest on our laurels, and we cannot go home at night thinking we are perfect. We cannot go home thinking that we will be here forever. We have got to stay on the cutting edge. We've got to be thinking about what is our value add.
Got to stay relevant.
And have data for that value add. Mm-hmm. A lot of times data collection, those just collect and research so we can write a study. But really it is creating data supporting the value add that we provide. And
well, after you get tenure anyway.
Yeah, after you tenure, good. Well, this is a crazy conversation. I would cry a river.
Maybe we should call them that, crazy conversation.
Yeah. Crazy conversations by Kate.
I'm making an Etsy page.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I think we all know that we're all committed, and I think it would be terrible. I mean, we have all been drastically impacted by ag education, and you guys are out there doing great work. And it's important to think about how do we validate that. Mm-hmm. So here we are with another critical conversation. Thanks for listening in. If you have some comments, jump in onto the post and talk to us about what do you think would happen.
And it would be really, really interesting. I would love to hear what your students have to say. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do they say? Here's the difference it made for me, so that we can actually take that right to what difference is it making?
Yeah.
At the actual.
So jump on and share in the comments. Let's talk about what would happen and what would your students say it's done for them. For this critical conversation, we are signing out. Best of luck, everybody. We hope that Brian will make it back through the hurricane.
We hope.
He has literally been getting text messages forcing him to evacuate, which is a problem because he's
going to go in
Oklahoma, flying to Florida.
Yes.
So best of luck.
Thanks.
All right, signing out. Thanks, you guys. We will catch you next time.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Owl Pellets. Please visit our webpage for more information on this topic and to learn more about all of our guests. Be sure to follow Owl Pellets on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It would also be great for you to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, we ask that you please take a moment and comment on our podcast so others can find it as well. So for Kate and Marshall, this is Brian here by the Owl Pellet saying thanks, and we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Owl Pellets, Tips for Ag Teachers.